Okay, so here we go. Welcome to the second edition of the SAP Platform Automation Roundtable for customers and partners. Warm welcome from my side. Happy to see you here, happy to have you here, and also happy that Teams doesn't throw any stones in my way this time. We are in March, at the end of March, so it's the March edition. Let's see what we have today. First of all, as usual with SAP, there's a disclaimer, so we might show you or tell you something about things that we have planned. Now plans might change, so take this stuff with a bit of a grain of salt. If this is something that we present out, so no worries, that's out. Then, as the first time, I have to do the housekeeping rules. So we use this Teams webinar. You have to register for each edition. That's how we have to drive it from our IT side. Please use the Q&A tool for any questions that you have so that we can do the Q&A at the end of the session. Now, as you have already seen, the entire session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on YouTube. So we will not use the share that is kind of connected to Teams, but we will move the recording to YouTube so that there are no obstacles for you to access it. All the slides will be shared on GitHub. Now, if you don't want to be recorded on YouTube, then please dial out. That's the chance now. If not, happy to have you here. The frequency of the roundtable, so we will try to stick up to a monthly cadence. We will have one session for all time zones. So if somebody has weeks in time zones where this is not a good time to join, let them know that the recording will be available afterwards. And with that, let's come to the content, why you are here, why you are waiting for this one. We will start with the usual what's new in March. So what did we do since the last edition of the roundtable? Then we will have several demos. One demo on the BTP CLI on a new feature about styling and formatting. Then we will present you also a new feature that we have implemented on the Terraform side of the house, listing resources and what you might be able to do with that. And then last time we had during the Q&A session a question around credential rotation via Terraform. And we kind of accepted that challenge and want to show you how we think it's possible to solve. In addition, some more news in point 3. So there is a UX survey out, and there is something that we would like to present you, which might be interesting for you. And then at the end of the session, we will have quite some time for Q&As from your end. This will then also be the point in time where we will hopefully be able to unmute you. Okay, let's get started. Now, I am just the messenger, so to say. So there is a huge team, or quite a big team behind the BTP CLI and the Terraform side. So all of the goodies that you see today have been brought to you by these great folks. So just to mention that. Now, what's new in March 2026? There are some highlights that I want to share with you. First highlight for the BTP CLI. So what you will also see in the demo is that we have done some updating around the styling and formatting of the output of the BTP CLI that makes it, from my perspective, much more usable and gives a better experience overall for CLI. Then also some new feature. There is the option now to manage central disaster recovery via new commands that are available within the BTP CLI. So if you want to pair sub-accounts for bringing in place the foundation for central disaster recovery, this is now possible via the BTP CLI. This will also come to the Terraform provider. Pull request is already merged, but the release is not yet out. So we will be feature pair between BTP CLI and Terraform with the next Terraform release. And then you might know that the BTP CLI also has an autocomplete feature that you have to set up there have been a bit of, yeah, I would say, differences between setting up something on a Mac OS or on a Linux or on a Windows system. So the autocomplete setup felt a bit different. Now this was refined, and now the autocomplete setup is configurable equally or in a consistent way on all operating systems. Now, if you don't know autocomplete, or if you don't use autocomplete, but you use the BTP CLI, I would highly recommend to try out this feature, because this helps a ton with crafting your commands. It's much more, I would say, fluent if you do it via autocomplete than doing it from the top of your head, remembering all the commands and the structure and so on. With that, let's switch to Terraform. What's new in March? That's the wrong title. So what's new in March on Terraform? So we closed several gaps that we still had on the import identities within our resources. So if you think about the resources that you can import, you have the option to do an import block. And with a later release of Terraform, there is also the option to use import identities. This is a very convenient way to define and configure your import code. Super useful. And this is the technical prerequisite for the second point. So we made now the first list resources available for you. So list or query, that's a new feature within Terraform that came out end of last year. And we are now catching up with the implementation of this feature. So for the Terraform provider for BTP, this is, I think, fully covered with the next release. We started with this feature on Cloud Foundry side, and for the SAP Cloud Connector, it's already fully featured and out. Then, due to one request from your end, from the customer side, we have a new option for role collection structuring. So if you're using Terraform, you know that when you created role collections, you had to attach roles to that resource. Now we got the feedback that some customers would like to manage this type of resource in a different way. So they would like to split things more like the BTP CLI has it in place, between creating a role collection and then assigning roles to a role collection. So that's why we have now two new resources that allow you to structure your Terraform code in this way, which can make sense if you want to split stuff according to the lifecycle, because probably you will create a role collection once and will rarely change it, but you will have a higher frequency of changes when you assign roles to that role collection. At least that's possible now. The old resource, or old quotes unquote resource, will stay in place. So no worries, we didn't deprecate there something. It's now just a second option that you have. And as a last point, that's more, I wouldn't say convenience feature, but that makes your life easier, is if you have a provisioning of Terraform in a very generic way. So if you want to structure your flows very generically, we have added to the data sources of service plans. So data source for service plan and data source for service plans, a new computed parameter, which exposes the environments where the service plan is available. So this should make your life a bit easier, because we still have services that might not be available for all environments. And this allows you to find out about that. So that's all from the Terraform side that we did. Now, I would say, let's take a look into the new features on the system. So let's start with the BTP CLI, the styling and formatting update. So let me switch to the console there. And as you know, the BTP CLI output was quite plain. I mean, it had some basic formatting in there, but if you compared it to other CLIs, it was really quite naked, I would say. Now, with this new update, so if you take a look at BTP version, minus version, But you already see that there is some color now in there. So with this version 2.106, you will see that there is a bit more color in there. So let's do a BTP help, just to get an overview. And what you see now is quite different to what you saw before. As you can see, there is already quite some highlighting, some banner. You have some different color coding on the core command, on the options. All the lists are now in a tabular format, so it's easier for you to kind of find the right entry there, at least from my perspective. And this, of course, is also propagated to some extent to the other commands. So if we have config ---- help, you will also see that now it's tailored down. You have a lot of information there. Of course, that's if we do a login, you see that there is now also color coding here. There are some bold fonts. And yeah, I want to log in, close that one. Then you see now that there is some more feedback with respect to the color coding. So authentication successful. Of course, there is a tick mark that's green now. So I think it's much easier to digest. For you, it's, I would say, guiding your eye in a more convenient way and should help you a lot with using the BTP CLI. So I think that's a really cool and nice addition. Be aware that it might not yet be everywhere in the BTP CLI. So we started with crafting that one. There might be commands that do not yet have this cool layout, but we are working on pushing it out. Of course, what's important for us, as usual, if you think that this is useful, if you like what you see, let us know, because then we can prioritize accordingly and move the needle forward much more than if we push it out and get no feedback and do not really know if that's cool or not, because just because I'm thinking that's cool, that doesn't mean anything, I would say. Okay, that's the BTP CLI styling and formatting update, and I hope you liked what you saw. Then Terraform LIST. This is a new feature within the Terraform framework, the Terraform CLI, so to say. So if we go to the corresponding directory. So with Terraform LIST, you can now query resources. Cool. Yeah, that's great. So I just see in the chat that there is some feedback that colors. So there are folks out there that like the colors like me. So cool. Thanks a lot. With Terraform, there is this new feature of Terraform lists or Terraform queries. What is possible there? So the idea is that you can query resources on your cloud infrastructure and get the information back, especially those resource identities that can be used for importing the resources. Now you might say, we already had data sources, right? What do we need those queries for? Well, with data sources, you could query the content of your resources, and you also got it back. But there was kind of this link missing with respect to importing, with respect maybe to analyzing the stuff that is now there with this query option. From a configuration perspective, it's a bit different compared to your usual Terraform configuration. So of course you have to define a provider, you can define variables, and then you have this new type of file, which is called tfquery.hcl. And within this tfquery, you find so-called list blocks. And those list blocks have to be attached to a provider, and they then query the cloud infrastructure with respect to what resources are there, and they hand you back either just the resource identity or all the information. Now, as you can see here on this resource, there is the option also to do some additional configuration. So to bring in, let's say, some more values for filtering the results. And for environment instances, this is kind of an required parameter because we need to know which sub-account you want to look at. Now, let's try that out. As you can see, the VS Code plugin does not yet recognize it, this new feature. Now, you can execute that by keying in Terraform query. And what this does is, in my case, I had an environment instance. I have 4 sub-accounts in my global account, and it returns that information and gives you, as I said before, the import of the resource identity, the import identity. Now that's quite plain. So let's check what this command can also do. So what you can do, and it is out since December. You can, of course, bring in variables via files or from the outside world. And then what's interesting is you can do a generate config out. So what you can do is you can generate the necessary configuration to import the resources. And you can also do a printout in JSON. So let's try out those two options, because especially for JSON, that's special. So as you can see here, the JSON is not the JSON as you would expect it, because the query functionality is a streaming functionality. So the responses get streamed. That's how it's implemented technically. And that's what you get back. So you don't get back one huge JSON object, but you get a so-called line delimited JSON object. So you can work with that one with JQ. You don't need any corrections or any adjustments there. So you can work with that, but be aware that if you just put it into a .json file, this might be a bit weird because you have those line delimited JSONs. Now let's take a look at the Terraform query. I have to check it how it's called. I always forget that one. It's minus generate config out. Yeah. So it's minus generate config out, and we say I want to do that in an import.tf or generate.tf, you name it. And what happens now is Terraform queries the, in our case, SAP BTP, fetches the response of the results and generates the import blocks as well as the resource configuration. So as you can see here, we have this environment instance, we have all this configuration in there, and we have the corresponding import block using the identity. So if you have not been using the identity for imports, that's kind of this block here, which from my perspective makes it easier readable if you have more complex keys there, and that's done for all our resources. Now this might spark some ideas on your end, and that also sparked some ideas on our end. Now, when you think about querying and generating the information that is necessary for imports, what about combining that with the information that you have within the state of your Terraform configuration? So you have some stuff that is managed, and you have some stuff that is unmanaged. And you would now like to, first of all, find out what's not managed. So what is not yet under the management of Terraform. And you would then also like to generate the import blocks for that. So we thought this is now a good option to give, in this case, Claude Code a spin and do a little proof of concept on that topic. What I have here is I have a sub account where I have a global account with 4 sub accounts. In one sub account, this is the first one, also a Cloud Foundry environment. Now, what I would like to do is analyze this, this account and some information about what's managed, what's not managed. So I now call, and again, that's a proof of concept. So take that with a grain of salt. I say, hey, tell me what are the unmanaged resources? And I first have to say, where is the provider configuration? So I have it in the tests provider.tf. And I have the backend configuration. Now, of course, I need to have the backend configuration because I have to access the state. So I have it also here. And if you're wondering, and if you have reading that, one moment, that's a local state. Why do we have a backend configuration? You can also configure a backend for local state. So you usually don't do that, but for the sake of this demo, I did it. And now I say, okay, I want to check for sub-accounts, and I want to check for environment instances. And now go ahead. Then, okay, for the environment instance, I have to key in the sub-account ID. So let's do that. And then it's starting the processing and doing its thing. Let's wait a bit until it's done. So it's doing it for the sub-account as well as for the service instance, which I think is cool. So what did it find out? So it found out that there are a total of 4 resources. 1 is managed by Terraform, 3 are not managed by Terraform when it comes to the sub-account. And it tells me, okay, this is my project for query experiments. That's part of, let me remove that one. That's managed by Terraform, and there are 3 resources, 3 sub-accounts that are not. Okay, cool. And then it's jumped over to the environment instance. There is just 1 environment instance, and that's not managed by Terraform. So as you can see, we have here also an overall summary, giving you an overview what's managed by Terraform, and shame on me, 20% coverage. So 4 resources are not managed. That's not good. So now I would like to generate the import blocks. Imports.tf sounds good. Now it's generating those import blocks. Now we can, of course, also generate the, as you have seen before, the resource configuration, or as a feedback from the Terraform exporter we got, is the import blocks already the most useful part. And as you can see here, we have now a CLI that was used to analyze our setup, that checked the setup and compared it to the state. And then, based on this analysis, created the import blocks of the resources that are not yet part of the Terraform setup. And as you can see here, cross-check, this was the sub-account that was managed by Terraform, so 6AD. And that's not here, so it's definitely different stuff that is fetched here. Now, as I said, that's a proof of concept. And we would like, and it's in an early stage, so that looks quite nice now. There is a lot of duct tape in there. But of course, we would like to know from your end, is this something that you think is useful, especially for those folks who are starting with Terraform, who are in a brownfield approach, who are now coming to a point where they say, okay, all the new resources are managed by Terraform. Now I want to make the step and also do the brownfield resources via this approach. Let us know. I'm definitely curious to hear your thoughts on that. And then we are at the 3rd demo for today. Last time there was one question in the Q&A which was asking, hey, how can I do credential rotations? Terraform for that. And I didn't know how to do that. but I kind of have an idea or a proposal how you can solve that. So let's switch to the last demo. So what do we have? I have a sub account, I have an audit log management, and I have a service instance for this audit log management. And now the question last time was about, well, I have now maybe a service binding. I use the service binding, for example, in a destination, and I want to roll this credential on a time-based manner. Now, before I start, in general, from my perspective, it would be really good to have all those credentials not mixed up there, but I know that that's not possible with how BTP works. So usually I would expect all the credentials to be in a vault or in a Azure Key Storage and have the rotation there. But unfortunately, that's not possible on BTP, at least not in all places. And so let's take a look how we can manage such a rotation via Terraform. Now, as you know, Terraform will only trigger changes if there is a drift. So we have to artificially introduce a drift in order to kick off the exchange of the resource. And for that, I'm using a resource that is a HashiCorp default resource that's time rotating. I'm setting it to rotation minutes 1 for obvious reasons, because we want to see a result in this demo. And I say this one depends on that there is a service instance, service binding, which has a life cycle block, which tells the resource, okay, whenever there is a recreation of this time rotating resource, then also trigger a replace for the service binding resource. We'll see that the timestamp will be part of the name. And then we can kind of massage this service binding, extract the relevant information, and put that into a destination. Here again, within the description of the destination, we will put in the timestamp. Yeah, that's that one. Okay, so let's see how that looks like in action. So what we will do now is a Terraform apply. So of course the sub account, etc., that's already there. So what we are doing is we're creating a destination, we are creating the service binding, and we are creating this time rotating resource. So let's do it. Yeah, that was fast and smooth. So let's take a look at the corresponding sub account. So what we will see here is we have now a service instance. This has a service binding, which has within its name this timestamp, so 10:29, so shortly at 10:30. And we have a destination. It contains the corresponding credential, and as you can see here, it has the same timestamp as the one before. Now, waiting 1 minute, we can then do another round of Terraform apply. 5 seconds now. Just looking at the chat. So yeah, it's already there. So we can now do a Terraform apply. And as I said before, now Terraform has a drift that we have introduced because this time rotating resource is used. And now it will do this rotation of the credential and will then update the destination. And we will see that in a second, because of course there is this destruction of the old service binding and the creation of the new service binding. And everything is up and running again. So if we take a look, and I will refresh just to be safe, the screen, we see we are now at 10:31. Before it was 10:29. And of course, we also see that here in the destination. So I hope, first of all, I hope the person who asked the question last time is also part of this session or sees the recording. This is how you can solve it. There is also a second option that I will put into the show notes on GitHub and at the YouTube video, where you can use a blue-green approach for changing the key or the bindings. This makes use of a third-party resource that is kind of maintained from my perspective, but I just wanted to mention that for the sake of completeness, that there is the option also to have a blue-green-like kind of deployment or exchange of those service instance bindings. And with that, we are at the end of the demos, but not yet at the end of the session. There is one, or there are two more things that I would like to mention. I guess you're here because you're using Terraform. I guess you're here because you're using the BTP CLI, and we rely on your feedback, as I mentioned before. And of course, you can bring that into this roundtable. You can drop me an email, and we will look at that. You can go to the GitHub repositories of the Terraform providers, bring in your feature requests. Now, there is also another option that we have now, which is available through March and April. Why? Because this is part of a greater initiative from the user experience side. So we have some user experience surveys open, where we would love to hear your feedback. We will learn from those surveys how you are using the CLI and Terraform, where you are seeing gaps with respect to the providers, with respect to the CLI, with respect to documentation, and so on and so forth. And we can take that and bring that to our backlog. Now, there are the links for those feedback sessions. So BTP CLI has a quite nice link. Terraform has, which points to Qualtrics, both point to Qualtrics service, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to do those surveys. So if you want, please give us the feedback. We would love to hear from you how you are using the tools. And then there is a second point that I would like to mention, and that came to my mind last time when we had this Q&A session. There was a question that I couldn't answer. Now, I would like to make that to a challenge. If you're attending this session and you are struggling at some point with BTP CLI or with Terraform, let us know. Maybe we find one, then we can present it in the next roundtable. Maybe we find none, then we can also present it in the next roundtable. But if you have a challenge, if you're struggling with something, yeah, give us a chance to solve it together. There is only one condition that I have. Drop me an email so that I know your email if we have any questions, if we need any clarification, because last time this Q&A, this was quite obvious that it was about the credential binding or the key, how to change things. And if you have something, hey, let us know. Let's do it. Let's find some nice solutions and help everybody to make Terraform BTP CLI even better. Now, with that, the usual call to action, if you have been there last time, you will see this every time. So we would love to hear your story, because it's not just me talking about what cool stuff we have done with CLI, with Terraform. We would really like to hear from you. What is your experience with Terraform and with the BTP CLI? You can share any experience, so it's not that you have to do a testimonial. If you have things where you stumbled across rough edges, let us know and share it with the community, because then we can work on that one. And it's also important that, yeah, everybody knows that there are some rough edges, and I'm quite sure that there are more than I'm maybe aware of. But yeah, we would love to hear your story and bring in some more community into this call. So if you have something, just ping me and we will find a date in one of the upcoming roundtable sessions. And with that, let's switch to the Q&A. And now let's see if I'm able to unmute you. Of course I'm not. Let me check. Maybe here. No, I have to do it. So just raise your hand if you want to speak up. Then I can unmute you. Otherwise, I have to go through the whole list. So let me know if somebody wants to join on the voice track. Otherwise, I will jump to the Q&A section. One question, are there any plans that the BTP CLI will be provided also in the Business Application Studio without manual install? Yes, I think that we have been in touch with the folks. I'm not sure what came out, but this is something either we stumbled across it in the last roundtable or this was somewhere in between. But we will follow up on that. So I think that makes perfect sense to have it there. Then the next question. Having the import list feature in place, it could be useful to import certain resources after subscription. For example, integration suite subscription will result in an additional role collection automatically. Maybe that could be a cool feature. Okay, that's an interesting thing. That's interesting, yeah. That's something we will wrap our head around because yes, I know that there is some magic going on. I think the same magic is going on also for your default IDP, if I'm not mistaken, where you might want to have some changes there. But that's cool feedback, so we will look into that one. Any more questions in the Q&A? If not, let's check the chat. I think Weepin was already quite busy. Is the Terraform unmanaged detection going to be part of drift detection? No. So these are kind of two different parts of the game. So listing or querying Terraform resources is kind of one feature that HashiCorp linked to the import, which makes sense. Drift detection is a different approach also from the internal mechanics side. Then next question, is there a provider for some minor S4 capabilities in plan, for example, to update credentials of communication users? That's something that was brought up also from different other points. To take also a look into the S4 capabilities and maybe automate there something that is deeply connected with BTP. We don't yet have any plans to do something there, but first of all, it would be great if you could open a feature request for that in the GitHub repository, and I think that's what we've been wrote, right? Yeah, and then we will take a look at it. Then I think there is a new post in the Q&A. In a following session, could you cover the new actions that are in the SCC item currently? Yes, of course. Of course we can. Great point. Thank you for that one. There is, besides the list feature, which is quite, I would say, it's not so sexy, let's say it that way, if you see it the first time. There is also a new feature within the new version of Terraform, which is called actions, which allow you to get rid of all those local exec provisioner stuff, in theory. Now we have now introduced actions within the SAP Cloud Connector provider, because there was some perfect landing place for that, and we can show that next time. But thanks for bringing that up. That's something that slipped me through. Yeah. Then we have one further feedback on. Let me check. On the input of passwords. So hate having to import password just to run Terraform locally without saving it to an env variable and raising security concerns. Yeah. Could it be possible that BTP selected a secure JSON file that could let Terraform provider fetch the credentials without having to input and change the syntax on a provider block? We can take a look at that one. I'm not super optimistic due to the fact that the things are not very well connected on that level. But I think what you would like to have is something like you have it on Azure, where you have an ASET login and reusing the authentication that is part of the ASET login. You reuse that for your local execution with Terraform, if I'm not mistaken. So just give a thumbs up or something like that on that. If that's the case, then we can take a closer look at that one. There is an answer on that one with the SSO option, so you can use SSO, but you will be prompted for the SSO quite often because of the different life cycle and how we integrated things. There is also the option to use X509 certificates, but I get your point and where you're coming from. Then also a proposal for the next session about identity cloud provider and some connected stuff between role collections and IAS groups. Yes, this might be something for an upcoming session. I'm hesitating a bit due to the fact that the cloud provider, the SAP Cloud Identity Services provider is still in beta, unfortunately for good reason, because it's it's not as stable as we would like it to have with respect to the APIs that are used in the backend. But once we are in a shape and form where it makes sense to present it and also makes sense that you jump on that train, we will do that presentation for sure. Yes, for authentication, coming back to the authentication topic, for authentication in pipelines, it makes sense to use the X509 certificates. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you correctly write, with SSO, you have to use the SSO button quite sometimes because plan and apply are different life cycles and we don't reuse the token at this moment. But fair feedback. So this is something that we will definitely take a look at. As I said, I'm not super optimistic that there will be a change soon, but I get your point. Any further questions, remarks? Anything else you would like to address? Now this is your chance. If you want to use audio, just raise your hand. If this is not the case, thanks a lot for attending this session. Thanks a lot. Oh, there is one hands up. Let me unmute you. So I think I can. I enabled your microphone, but it doesn't show up. Roger, can you try to talk? Let's see if that works. You're muted now, so you should be able to talk. So muting has to be So muting has to be switched off on your end. That's nothing that I can do.
Okay, is that any better?
That's much better.
Right, okay, great. So just wanted to say thank you very much for these sessions. They're very useful. One request, when it comes to some of the documentation for the modules that you've got in there, is it possible to show what those are creating back with inside of the portal?
What modules do you mean?
Yeah, well, so when you're using your BTP resources, that you're going off and creating via the CLI or via the Terraform, it's quite often quite a challenge in trying to work out how to replicate something you're doing within the portal to then work out which resource it is we're wanting to use and create. It's just from a documentation perspective. I've worked through it, but it is one of those things for anyone new coming on board would be very helpful.
So the scenario would be, if I understand you correctly, rephrasing it. So if you're starting with Terraform and you have been working in the cockpit, then you would like to know, if I do this with Terraform, what would there be the manifestation within the cockpit? So what should happen where in the cockpit? Correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So have you been here in the last session?
Yes, I was.
Okay, because I think I mentioned it, but I didn't show a screenshot of it. That was my fault. We are planning for this year to integrate code snippets for the BTP CLI as well as for Terraform into the cockpit.
Okay.
So the way would be the other way around, that you are mentioning it, because we saw that a lot of folks are struggling with jumping from the cockpit to Terraform or BTP CLI because of, I think, the same reason that you just mentioned. It's because of you basically don't know what you're doing, quotes unquote. So no offense, but you struggle with transferring the knowledge that you have from the cockpit into the CLI or into Terraform. And this is where we want to build a bridge and have code blocks for all the resources in the cockpit. So we will start with the overview screen as a first try. And give you the exact code block that you need in order to replicate what you see in the cockpit. Would that cover your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. No, and the other one was thanks again for the work that they've done in the cloud connector with those actions and the new certificate elements. I've 99% got it working. Hopefully by the end of the day.
So if there are any issues, you know where to find us on GitHub. So if you run into something, hey, just ping us. Thanks a lot. I think you also raised a feature request, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, yes.
Cool stuff. So thanks for that. And yeah, next time we will spend some amount on the cloud connector. And I think it also makes sense to bring in the guy who mainly developed it to show the stuff that he can, I think, be proud of.
Yes, I'm very proud. Yes, it's working really nicely.
Cool stuff. Great. Any more points that you would like to mention, folks? If not, then I would say thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this session. See you again in 4 or 5 weeks round with some more updates and hopefully with some more stuff that you have asked within this session that we can cover. Bear with us. We try our best to do everything, but limited time is there. So nevertheless, thanks for your feedback. We will try to make your life easier and better on SAP BTP and all the surrounding areas. Then, see you next time. Have a great rest of the week. And happy terraforming, happy BTP CLIing.